I stared at my phone screen through the fluorescent bathroom lights, my heart racing with the kind of recklessness only weeks of anonymous flirtation can give you. My fingers trembled as I angled the camera, catching just enough lace beneath my work skirt to make his imagination run wild. Shadow_King97 had sent me a message an hour earlier, thinking about you. Wish I could see you right now. Well, wish granted. I adjusted my blouse one more time, made sure my face wasn't in the frame, and snapped my underwear photo. Heat flooded my cheeks as I typed out the message that would change everything. Since you asked so nicely. Hope this makes your afternoon more interesting. Winking face. I hit send with a triumphant tap of my thumb, feeling like the boldest woman alive. 3 weeks of playing it safe. 3 weeks of holding back while he pushed every boundary with those midnight messages that made me forget my own name. 3 weeks of wondering who this mysterious man was behind the cartel logo and expensive lifestyle photos. It all came rushing out in that single moment of confidence. That's right, I whispered to my reflection, adjusting my skirt. Linda Kayla doesn't play small anymore. I waited for his response, imagining the look on his face when he opened that photo. The thrill of anticipation coursed through my veins like electricity. Shadow_King97 was probably in some penthouse somewhere, maybe in a business meeting, about to get the shock of his life. I felt powerful, desired, in control. But when my screen flickered and reloaded, I discovered that control was about to turn into something I never could have imagined. The app glitched, and my stomach dropped so fast I thought I might throw up. The cartel logo was gone. In its place was a face I recognized with bone-deep horror, sharp suit, cold eyes, aristocratic Korean features I saw every single day across the office. Francis Tom, my boss, the executioner, Shadow_King97. My phone slipped from my trembling hands, clattering against the bathroom tile like a gunshot. The sound echoed in the small space, but I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was seeing. What had I done? With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and stared at the screen, praying I'd imagined it. But no, there he was. Francis Tom's professional headshot stared back at me from the dating profile I'd been pouring my heart out to for weeks. The same Francis Tom who fired people for arriving 7 minutes late. The same Francis Tom whose phone calls in Korean made grown men nervous. The same Francis Tom who was rumored to have connections that extended far beyond corporate boardrooms. The man I'd just sent an explicit photo to. During work hours, from the company bathroom, my mind raced through every conversation, every intimate detail I'd shared, every photo I'd sent over the past 3 weeks. Oh God, the things I'd told him. My childhood trauma, my coffee order, my deepest fears, my fantasies about what I'd do if we ever met. He knew everything, and I'd just given him proof of misconduct that could destroy my career with a single HR complaint. The bathroom stall suddenly felt like a cage. I couldn't stay here. I had to fix this. I had to explain that I didn't know it was him, that this was all a terrible mistake, that I would never. I burst out of the stall and practically ran to his office, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. People stared as I rushed past their cubicles, but I didn't care. I had to get to Francis before he what? Fired me? Reported me? Used those messages against me? I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't let this stand. When I reached his door, I didn't knock. Didn't pause. Just burst in with words already tumbling from my mouth in a frantic, desperate stream. Mr. Tom, I am so sorry, I didn't know it was you, I would never have, the app must have glitched or, I can explain everything. Francis looked up from his laptop with an expression of perfect, infuriating confusion. Ms. Kayla? His voice was ice. What are you talking about? And that's when I realized, he was going to make me say it. Make me explain exactly what I'd done. Make me admit that I'd been texting explicit messages to a stranger on a dating app during work hours. Or worse, he was going to pretend he had no idea what I was talking about. The fluorescent lights overhead suddenly felt too bright, the office walls too close, and Francis Tom's dark eyes too knowing. I was trapped, and from the slight curve of his lips, barely there, almost invisible, he knew it. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment and let me know what you think Linda should do next. Now, let's get into. Linda Kayla had become a master of invisible survival. Every morning at 7:45 a.m., she'd slip into Apex Holdings through the side entrance, brew Francis Tom's coffee exactly how he liked it, black, 2 ice cubes, in the specific mug he preferred, and settle at her desk before he arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. She never made eye contact unless directly addressed. She triple-checked every document, every email, every spreadsheet, because Francis Tom didn't tolerate mistakes. Not even small ones. His previous assistant had been fired for using the wrong font in a PowerPoint presentation. The marketing coordinator before that got terminated for suggesting an idea Francis later decided was mediocre. Linda had survived 6 months by mastering the art of being present but unseen, efficient but forgettable, valuable but invisible. By day, she was Work Linda, the woman who kept her head down, her voice quiet, and her opinions to herself. She wore neutral colors, sensible shoes, and an expression of professional competence that revealed absolutely nothing about the chaos inside her head. Francis would pass her desk without acknowledgement, his expensive suits and cold demeanor creating an atmosphere where everyone held their breath until he disappeared into his office. Linda had perfected the timing of when to deliver reports, when to ask questions, when to simply anticipate his needs before he voiced them. Survival meant reading the room, staying 2 steps ahead, and never, ever crossing the invisible boundaries that separated boss from employee. But when 5 p.m. hit and Linda walked through her apartment door, Work Linda disappeared. Real Linda emerged in her tiny 1-bedroom sanctuary filled with framed Korean drama posters, an overstuffed bookshelf, and the lingering scent of jerk chicken seasoning. This was where she could breathe. Where she could be herself without performance or pretense. She'd change into comfortable clothes, pour herself a glass of wine, and scroll through dating apps while some K-drama played in the background. Crash landing on you. Business proposal. The ones where ordinary women caught the attention of powerful men who actually saw them. Linda kept her dating life casual by design. She'd learned the hard way that vulnerability was dangerous. Her father had walked out when she was 12 without explanation, leaving her mother to raise 2 kids alone. Her college boyfriend had cheated with her roommate, making her question everything she thought she knew about trust. So Linda dated multiple men at once, never letting any single person get too close, never sharing too much of herself with anyone. She'd perfected the art of surface-level connection, flirty texts, casual meetups, nothing that required her to tear down the walls she'd spent years building. It was safer this way. Lonely, but safer. Then one Thursday night, while half-watching Secretary Kim and eating leftover jerk chicken, Linda swiped right on a profile that made her pause. No face. Just a sleek cartel logo, a crowned serpent wrapped around a sword. The username read, shadow_king97, and his bio was maddeningly simple. Actions speak louder than selfies. His photos showcased wealth she could only dream of, private jet interiors, penthouse views of city skylines, designer watches that probably cost more than her car, exotic sports cars with carefully obscured license plates. Linda almost swiped left. Faceless profiles usually meant married men or catfishes. But something made her stop. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the loneliness that had been gnawing at her lately. Maybe it was just curiosity about a man confident enough to hide his face while flaunting everything else. She sent a simple message, interesting approach. Most men lead with their best angle. You lead with mystery. Bold choice. She expected silence. Maybe a crude pickup line if he responded at all. What she got was a reply that would unravel everything she thought she knew about control, compartmentalization, and the dangerous illusion that she could keep parts of her life safely separated. Mystery keeps things interesting. Besides, most people show you who they want to be. I'd rather show you who I am through conversation. Tell me, Linda, what are you really looking for? And just like that, the walls she'd built so carefully began to crack. What Linda didn't know was that the man on the other end of that message already knew exactly who she was, where she worked, and how she took her coffee. He'd been watching her for months. Linda stared at shadow_king97's latest message, her wine glass forgotten on the coffee table. He'd just asked her something no one had ever bothered to ask before. What's the dream you abandoned because someone told you it was impractical? Not, send pics. Not, what are you wearing? Not the usual garbage she'd grown accustomed to from faceless profiles. This man was different. Over the next 2 weeks, their conversations became the oxygen Linda didn't know she'd been suffocating without. Shadow_King97 didn't just talk, he listened. He remembered. When Linda mentioned she took her coffee with oat milk and cinnamon on a Tuesday, he referenced it again on Friday. When she confessed her irrational fear of thunderstorms stemmed from the night her father left during a storm, he didn't laugh or minimize it. Instead, he sent her a playlist titled, Songs Louder Than Thunder, with a note, for the next time the sky gets too loud. He recommended films she'd never heard of, Korean indie movies, French psychological thrillers, documentaries about things she didn't know fascinated her until he explained why they should. He sent her recipes from countries she'd never visited, explaining the cultural significance of each ingredient. When she admitted her favorite movie was The Princess Bride, he didn't mock her for the cliché choice. He quoted it back to her at random moments throughout their conversations, making her laugh at 3 a.m. while she should have been sleeping. Linda found herself opening up in ways that terrified her. She told him about her father's abandonment, about finding her college boyfriend in bed with her roommate, about feeling invisible at work despite being good at her job. She shared her secret hope that someone might actually see her, not work Linda or casual dating Linda, but the real her underneath all the protective layers. And Shadow_King97 saw her. Or at least, he made her believe he did. But there was a pattern Linda couldn't ignore, one that gnawed at her even as she fell deeper into their digital intimacy. During work hours, Shadow_King97 became a different person. She'd send him a funny meme during her lunch break, and he'd respond with, busy, or just a single emoji. She'd share something that happened at the office, and he'd reply hours later with something curt, almost cold. It stung every time, made her question if she was reading too much into their connection. Then 9 p.m. would hit, and he'd transform. Sorry about earlier. Work was intense. Tell me about your day. Don't leave anything out. The attentive Shadow_King97 would return, flirtatious, bold, asking questions that made her blush and type responses she'd never have the courage to say out loud. He'd describe what he'd do if they ever met, paint pictures with words that made her forget every reason she'd ever had for keeping her walls up. Linda tried everything to unmask him. She suggested phone calls, he declined, claiming he valued the purity of written communication. She initiated video calls, he always had an excuse, poor connection, business meeting, traveling through areas with bad service. She ran reverse image searches on every photo he posted, but the exotic locations and carefully cropped shots revealed nothing. The more he hid, the more obsessed she became. Her friends noticed. Jessica cornered her in the break room. Girl, you're glowing. Who is he? Linda couldn't explain Shadow_King97 without sounding crazy. A faceless stranger who knew her coffee order but wouldn't show his face. A man who ran hot and cold with predictable precision. She was falling for words on a screen, and she knew it was dangerous. But she couldn't stop. One night, he sent her a message that made her breath catch. Tell me, Linda. What would you do if you discovered I was closer than you think? She dismissed it as flirtation, typed back something playful about how he'd have to reveal himself first. What she didn't realize was that it wasn't a hypothetical question. It was a warning she was too infatuated to hear. And the answer would soon destroy everything she thought she knew about control, safety, and the carefully compartmentalized life she'd built to protect herself. The warning about Shadow_King97 being married still echoed in Linda's head as she watched Francis Tom destroy someone's career over a typo. This is unacceptable. Francis's voice cut through the morning meeting like a blade, his Korean accent making each word sound sharper than it should. He held up a printed report, his expression carved from ice. 7 years with this company, and you still can't proofread a single document? The marketing coordinator, a man named David who had a wife and 2 kids, went pale. Mr. Tom, I can fix it immediately. It's just one mistake is all it takes. Francis dropped the report on the conference table. Clear your desk by noon. The room held its collective breath as David stumbled out, his career ended over a misplaced decimal point. Linda kept her eyes down, her pen perfectly still on her notepad. This was Francis Tom's world. Ruthless, unforgiving, operating by standards that seemed designed to ensure everyone eventually failed. At 32, Francis ran Apex Holdings with the kind of brutal precision that earned him the nickname, the Executioner, whispered in breakrooms and parking lots. Tall, devastatingly handsome with sharp Korean features that could have graced magazine covers, he moved through the office like a cold front, dropping the temperature wherever he went. His suits were custom-tailored perfection. His watch probably cost more than Linda's car. His expression never changed from that aristocratic mask of perpetual displeasure. He barely acknowledged Linda's existence beyond curt instructions delivered in that accented voice. Coffee. The usual mug. These reports need revisions. Reschedule my 2 o'clock. She was furniture to him. Useful, forgettable furniture that had somehow survived 6 months by being competent enough to keep but invisible enough to ignore. The office buzzed with rumors about Francis Tom that went far beyond typical corporate gossip. Some said he had connections to Korean organized crime, that Apex Holdings was just a legitimate front for money laundering operations spanning 3 continents. Others whispered about his family's ties to powerful syndicates in Seoul, about debts paid in blood rather than currency, about problems that disappeared with disturbing efficiency. Linda had seen enough to wonder if the rumors might be true. She'd watched Francis take phone calls in Korean with men who looked like they'd walked out of action movies, expensive suits hiding dangerous bodies, cold eyes that assessed everything as either asset or threat. She'd witnessed him make problems disappear with a single call, an IRS audit that evaporated overnight, a journalist's exposé that never got published, a competitor's hostile takeover that collapsed inexplicably. Whatever Francis Tom was beyond his CEO title, Linda wanted no part of it. She kept her head down, did her job, and counted the hours until she could escape to her apartment and her phone screen where Shadow_King97 made her feel like she mattered. Linda. Francis's voice snapped her back to the present. Stay after this meeting. Her stomach dropped. Had she made a mistake? Forgotten something? She ran through every task from the past week, searching for the error that would end her employment. But when everyone else filed out, Francis simply handed her a file. Process these by end of day. Then he walked away, already on his phone speaking rapid Korean to someone who apparently deserved his attention more than she did. That afternoon in the break room, Jessica cornered her with concerns about a different dangerous man. I'm telling you, Linda, Shadow_King97 is married, Jessica insisted, stirring sugar into her coffee. The whole, no face, no calls thing? Classic cheater behavior. He's probably texting you from the bathroom while his wife watches their kids. Linda wanted to argue, but what defense did she have? A gut feeling? An emotional connection to words on a screen? He's different, was all she could manage. They always are, Jessica said softly. Until they're not. That night, staring at her phone while some K-drama played unwatched in the background, Linda made a decision. She was tired of being careful, tired of walls and boundaries and playing it safe. Shadow_King97 wanted mystery? She could give him mystery. He wanted to play games? She could play too. She typed out a message that crossed every line she'd carefully maintained. I'm done with careful. You want to keep hiding? Fine, but I'm not holding back anymore. Let's see who breaks first. His response came faster than usual, and the words made her pulse race in ways that should have felt like warning bells. Careful what you wish for, Linda. Some games have consequences you're not prepared for. She should have listened, should have recognized the threat hidden in the promise. But Linda Kayla had spent too long being invisible, being careful, being safe. It was time to be reckless. What she didn't know was that across town, in a penthouse office, Francis Tom smiled at his phone screen for the first time all day. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. What started as Shadow_King97 asking about her day evolved into him asking what she was wearing. What began as flirtation about hypothetical meetings transformed into explicit descriptions of exactly what he'd do if they were in the same room. And Linda, careful, compartmentalized Linda who never let anyone too close, found herself matching his energy with a recklessness that shocked her. If you were here right now, he typed one night at 11 p.m., I'd start by running my hands through your hair, pulling your head back so I could see your face when I whisper exactly what I've been thinking about all day. Linda's fingers trembled as she typed back, crossing boundaries she'd never even approached with men she'd actually met in person. There was something intoxicating about the anonymity, the freedom to be completely herself without fear of judgment, without worrying about being too much or not enough. Shadow_King97 didn't know work Linda or careful Linda. He only knew the raw, unfiltered version she'd kept locked away for years. She started sending photos. Never her face, she wasn't completely reckless. But suggestive angles, lace and shadow, just enough to drive his imagination wild while maintaining plausible deniability. His responses made her heart race and her comments say, "You're going to be the death of me, Linda. Do you have any idea what you do to me?" He made her feel powerful, desired, seen in ways no one ever had. "You're brilliant," he told her after she vented about her boss taking credit for her work. "Don't let mediocre men make you forget that. You're beautiful," he said when she admitted feeling invisible most days. "Anyone who doesn't see you is blind. You're brave," he wrote when she shared fears she'd never told anyone else. "Braver than you realize." Linda started to wonder if she was falling in love with words on a screen. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the most honest thing she'd experienced in years. Her friends noticed the change. "You're distracted," Jessica said during lunch. "Smiling at your phone every 5 minutes. This Shadow_King guy has you hooked." "It's not like that," Linda lied. "It's exactly like that. And it's going to end badly. Men who hide their faces always do." Her mother would be horrified if she knew Linda was sending provocative photos to a stranger whose real name she didn't even know. But Linda couldn't stop. Didn't want to stop. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The messages grew bolder. He described scenarios that made her blush in the privacy of her apartment, fantasies that would have seemed crude from anyone else but felt like promises from him. Linda responded with equal intensity, surprised by her own boldness, by how easily she shed every careful layer she usually wore. Then one night, after an exchange that left them both breathless through their screens, Shadow_King97 sent a message that made something cold settle in Linda's stomach. "Tell me, Linda, what would you do if you discovered I was closer than you think? If I told you we'd already been in the same room, breathing the same air, and you had no idea?" Linda stared at the message, her pulse quickening for reasons that had nothing to do with desire. She typed back something playful, dismissing it as dirty talk. Maybe he was implying they'd passed each other on the street, creating some romantic notion about fate and missed connections. "I'd say you're full of mystery and very good at building anticipation. Is this where you finally reveal yourself?" His response came quickly. "Soon. Very soon. But first, I want to see how far you're willing to go. How reckless you can be. Show me the Linda who doesn't play it safe." She should have heard the warning beneath the seduction. Should have recognized the dare for what it was, a test, a trap, a carefully constructed scenario leading to an outcome only he could see. But Linda Kayla was drunk on feeling wanted, high on the illusion of control, convinced she was the one pushing boundaries when really she was walking straight into them. The next day at work, when Francis Tom passed her desk without acknowledgement, Linda didn't notice the slight curve of his lips. Didn't see him check his phone the moment he entered his office. Didn't realize that the countdown to her carefully separated worlds colliding had already begun. She had 48 hours before everything she thought she knew about control, safety, and the men she trusted would shatter like glass. Things are about to get intense. If you want to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Trust me, you do not want to miss the next few chapters. Drop a comment telling me if you saw this coming. Now let's get into the 48-hour countdown Linda didn't know existed. Ended on a Wednesday that started like any other and finished like a nightmare. Francis had been impossible all morning. The quarterly report Linda spent 3 days perfecting? Mediocre. Redo it. The presentation she'd formatted according to his exact specifications? The font is wrong. Fix it. The schedule she'd triple-checked? You put my 2 o'clock at 3. Are you even paying attention? Except Linda had the emails proving every criticism was baseless. The font was the one he'd requested. The meeting was scheduled exactly where he'd told her to put it. Francis Tom was manufacturing errors, pushing her toward some edge she couldn't see. By 2 p.m., Linda was exhausted, frustrated, and desperate for an escape from the relentless criticism. She retreated to the bathroom, locked herself in the furthest stall, and pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Shadow_King97 had sent a message an hour earlier. Thinking about you. Wish I could see you right now. Linda stared at those words, her heart pounding with something between defiance and desire. She'd been playing it safe for weeks, holding back while he pushed every boundary. He wanted to see her? Fine. She'd give him exactly what he asked for. The idea bloomed reckless and intoxicating in her mind. She was tired of being careful, tired of invisible, tired of Francis Tom's impossible standards and Shadow_King97's mysterious games. For once, she'd be the one in control. The one pushing boundaries. The one making him lose composure. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted her blouse, checking her reflection in the phone's camera. She angled it carefully, never her face, always careful about that, but suggestive enough to make his imagination run wild. The lace of her underwear visible beneath her hiked-up work skirt, the curve of her body framed just right. Heat flooded her cheeks as she reviewed the photo. This was insane. She was in a corporate bathroom, for God's sake. During work hours. But something about the recklessness felt like reclaiming power she'd lost somewhere between her father leaving and her ex-boyfriend's betrayal. Before she could second-guess herself, before common sense could override impulse, Linda hit send. Wish granted winking face. She waited for his response, that familiar thrill of anticipation coursing through her veins like electricity. He was probably in some meeting, about to get the shock of his life. Maybe he'd excuse himself, find somewhere private to respond. Maybe he'd. 5 seconds passed. 10. 15. Then her phone screen flickered. The Lux Connect app reloaded with that spinning circle that meant something was processing, updating, changing. Linda watched it with mild irritation, thinking it was just a glitch, a momentary technical issue that would resolve in seconds. The app refreshed, and Linda's entire world shattered into pieces she'd never be able to put back together. The cartel logo was gone. In its place was a professional headshot she recognized with bone-deep, soul-destroying horror. Sharp suit, cold eyes, aristocratic Korean features she saw every single day across the office. Francis Tom, her boss, the executioner, the man who'd just spent all morning criticizing her work. Shadow_King97. The phone slipped from her trembling hands, clattering against the bathroom tile like a gunshot. The sound echoed in the small space, but Linda couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was seeing. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. Francis Tom, emotionless, terrifying Francis Tom, was the man who'd been sending her filthy messages at midnight? The man who knew she was afraid of thunderstorms? The man who'd just received an explicit photo of her taken in his company's bathroom during work hours? Linda's mind raced through every conversation, every intimate detail she'd shared, every boundary she'd crossed. The things she'd told him about hating her boss. The complaints about feeling invisible at work. The explicit photos. The fantasies. Oh God, the fantasies about what she'd do if they ever met. He knew everything, and she'd just given him evidence of misconduct that could destroy her career, her reputation, her entire life with a single forwarded message to our. Linda grabbed her phone with shaking hands, praying she'd imagined it, praying it was some cruel glitch, some impossible coincidence. But no, there he was. Francis Tom's professional headshot stared back at her from the profile she'd been pouring her heart out to for weeks. She had to fix this. Had to explain. Had to somehow undo what couldn't be undone. Linda burst out of the bathroom stall and ran. What she didn't know was that in his office 3 floors up, Francis Tom was smiling at his phone screen, reading her message one more time before the real game began. The running had been instinct, not strategy. Linda's body moving on pure panic while her brain struggled to process the impossible reality staring back at her from the phone screen. Francis Tom was Shadow_King97. The man who fired people for breathing wrong had been the one asking about her dreams at midnight. The boss who barely acknowledged her existence was the same person who'd sent her a playlist for thunderstorms. The CEO rumored to have Mafia connections had been describing in explicit detail what he'd do if they ever met. They'd already met. Every single day. She'd been bringing him coffee while he pretended she was invisible, all while knowing exactly how she took hers, oat milk and cinnamon, a detail she'd shared with Shadow_King 97 3 weeks ago. Linda's mind raced through every conversation with mounting horror. She'd complained to him about her terrible boss. She'd called Francis Tom emotionless, cruel, impossible to work for. She'd sent those complaints to Francis Tom himself, and he'd responded with sympathy, with understanding, with, "Oh God." He'd been playing her. For weeks. Maybe months. How long had he known who she was before matching with her? Had he sought her out deliberately? Created that profile specifically to the photo. The explicit photo she'd just sent. Taken at work. In the company bathroom. During work hours. Using company Wi-Fi. She was going to be fired. No, worse than fired. If the rumors about Francis were true, if he really did have connections to Korean organized crime, she might be in actual danger. People who crossed Francis Tom didn't just lose their jobs. They disappeared from the industry entirely, their reputations destroyed, their careers obliterated. And Linda had just sent him photographic evidence of misconduct. She didn't remember leaving the bathroom. Didn't remember navigating the hallways or climbing the stairs to the executive floor. Her body moved on autopilot, driven by sheer panic and the desperate, irrational need to explain, to apologize, to somehow undo what couldn't be undone. Maybe if she threw herself on his mercy. Maybe if she promised to never speak of this again. Maybe if she begged. Linda burst through Francis's office door without knocking, without pausing, without thinking about the fact that barging into the executioner's office uninvited was grounds for immediate termination even without the photo incident. "Mr. Tom, I am so sorry, I didn't know it was you, I would never have, I mean, the app must have glitched or something, I can explain everything, please, I just." The words tumbled out in a frantic, incoherent mess, tripping over each other in her desperation to make him understand that this was a mistake, an accident, a terrible misunderstanding that could be fixed if he'd just give her a chance to. Francis looked up from his laptop with an expression of perfect, infuriating confusion. "Ms. Kayla?" His voice was ice, his Korean accent making each syllable sharp enough to cut. "What are you talking about?" Linda froze, her prepared explanation dying in her throat. He was looking at her like she'd lost her mind. Like she was a stranger having a breakdown in his office. Like he had absolutely no idea what she was referring to. The photo. The messages. Lux Connect. "I know it's you. I know you're Shadow_King 97. Francis's eyebrow arched slightly, the only indication of emotion she'd ever seen from him. "I have no idea what you're referring to. Are you feeling all right? Perhaps you should go home for the day." Linda stared at him, her mind struggling to process his denial. He was good. Too good. His face revealed nothing, no guilt, no acknowledgement, no hint that he'd spent the last 3 weeks describing what he wanted to do to her body. But she knew what she'd seen. The profile picture had been his face. Crystal clear. Unmistakable. But I saw. Saw what, exactly? Francis's voice went dangerously soft now, his dark eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Please, enlighten me about this app? And what photo you seem to think involves me." The trap snapped shut around Linda with precision she was too panicked to recognize. He was gaslighting her, playing innocent, and she realized with growing horror that she had no proof. The app had reloaded. The profile picture could change back with a single click. It would be her word against his, the word of a junior employee against the CEO. She'd look insane. Worse than insane. She'd look like she was sexually harassing her boss with false accusations, creating scenarios in her head, having some kind of breakdown that required immediate termination and possibly psychiatric evaluation. "I'm sorry," Linda whispered, backing toward the door like prey retreating from a predator. "I made a mistake. I'll just go back to work." Francis nodded slowly, his expression never changing from that mask of cold professional concern. "Please do." Then, just as Linda's hand touched the door handle, he delivered the words that confirmed everything while maintaining perfect deniability, "And Ms. Kayla? Perhaps you should be more careful about what you do on company time. And with whom you share personal photographs." The words hit like a physical slap. He knew. Of course he knew. And he was letting her know that he knew while giving her absolutely no recourse, no proof, no way to fight back. Linda fled. Linda fled Francis's office with his parting words echoing in her skull like a death sentence. Perhaps you should be more careful about what you do on company time. And with whom you share personal photographs. He'd maintained perfect deniability while simultaneously confirming he knew everything. It was masterful, really, the kind of psychological manipulation that probably came naturally to a man rumored to have organized crime connections. Francis Tom had just gaslit her into questioning her own sanity while making it crystal clear that he held every card, every piece of evidence, every ounce of power in whatever sick game he was playing. Linda's face burned with humiliation as she stumbled back to her desk. A few coworkers glanced up, curious about her flustered appearance, but she avoided eye contact. What could she possibly say? That she'd just accused the CEO of catfishing her on a dating app? That she'd burst into his office rambling about explicit photos and midnight messages while he stared at her like she needed medication? She sank into her chair, her hands trembling so badly she had to clasp them together to stop the shaking. Her computer screen blurred as she tried to focus on the quarterly report Francis had criticized that morning, the one he'd called mediocre despite knowing it was flawless. Because of course he'd known it was flawless. He'd been setting her up all morning, pushing her toward frustration, toward seeking an outlet, toward making the exact reckless decision she'd made in that bathroom stall. Francis had orchestrated everything. Linda pulled out her phone with shaking hands, opening Lux Connect with a prayer that she'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it had been a glitch. Maybe some technical error had temporarily displayed the wrong photo. Maybe Shadow_King97's profile was completely gone. Not just the photo, the entire account, deleted, as if it had never existed. No chat history, no messages, no evidence of 3 weeks of intimate conversations. Just empty space where her heart had been slowly opening to someone she thought might actually see her. Linda's stomach lurched. He'd erased everything. Every promise, every vulnerability she'd shared, every explicit message and photo, all gone from her end. But Francis still had copies. Of course he did. He probably had screenshots, backups, insurance for whatever endgame he'd been planning since the moment he created that profile. She checked her phone's camera roll, scrolling back to find the photo she'd sent an hour ago. Her finger hovered over the delete button, but what was the point? He already had it. Deleting it from her phone wouldn't change anything. The rest of the workday passed in a blur of numb shock. Linda couldn't focus, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but replay the bathroom revelation and office confrontation on an endless, tortuous loop. Every time she glanced toward Francis's office, she found him working as though nothing had happened, taking calls, reviewing documents, maintaining that same expressionless mask he wore like armor. As though her entire world hadn't just imploded. As though he hadn't just confirmed he'd been manipulating her for weeks. As though the power dynamic between them hadn't shifted into something dangerous and inescapable. At 4:47 p.m., Linda's computer pinged with an email from Francis Tom. Subject line, performance review. Her blood turned to ice. She opened it with shaking hands, expecting termination papers or HR complaints or legal threats. Instead, she found a single sentence. Please see me in my office at 5 p.m. sharp to discuss recent performance concerns. Performance concerns. The phrase was deliberately vague, designed to be read by anyone monitoring company emails as completely innocent while Linda knew exactly what it meant. He was summoning her, making her come to him, reminding her that in this building, in this power structure, he controlled everything, including when and where they'd have the conversation that would determine whether she still had a career tomorrow. Linda stared at the clock. She had 13 minutes to decide whether to show up for that meeting or walk out of Apex Holdings forever. Except walking out wasn't really an option, was it? Francis had made that clear with his parting words about being careful with personal photographs. If she ran, he'd ensure she'd never work in this city again. Maybe never work anywhere. But if she stayed, if she walked into that office at 5 p.m. sharp like he'd commanded. What then? At 4:58 p.m., Linda stood up from her desk. Her coworkers were packing up, heading home to their normal lives where their bosses weren't secretly their online lovers, where their careers weren't hanging by threads, where their worst mistakes stayed private instead of becoming ammunition. She walked toward Francis's office on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. She had no idea what waited for her behind that door. But she was about to find out that the conversation in his office was just the appetizer. The real ultimatum would come later that night, when Francis Tom showed up at her apartment with a smile that promised her carefully compartmentalized life was about to be destroyed completely. The 5 p.m. meeting Linda had been dreading never happened. When she'd approached Francis's office at 4:58, his door was closed, his lights off, his assistant already gone for the day. The email summoning her had been another mind game, making her sweat, making her wait, making her understand that he controlled the timeline of her destruction. Francis Tom had left the building without a word, leaving Linda standing outside his empty office feeling like a fool. The rest of the workday, all 12 minutes of it, passed in a fog of shame and anxiety so thick Linda could barely breathe through it. She returned to her desk, grabbed her purse, and left at exactly 5 p.m., practically running to her car in the parking garage like something might chase her if she moved too slowly. Maybe something would. Maybe Francis. Maybe the consequences of her recklessness finally catching up. Linda's hands shook so badly she could barely get her key in the ignition. She sat in her car for 5 full minutes, engine running, trying to decide what to do next. Go to HR? And say what, exactly? That her boss was catfishing her on a dating app? That she'd sent him explicit photos during work hours using company Wi-Fi? She'd be fired before she finished the first sentence, and Francis would walk away clean with his perfect deniability intact. Go to the police? Report what? A dating app conversation that no longer existed? A man who'd never technically done anything illegal? Run? Pack a bag and disappear to another city where Francis Tom's reputation and rumored connections couldn't reach her? Linda drove home on autopilot, her mind spinning through impossible scenarios that all ended the same way. Her life destroyed, her career obliterated, her reputation in ruins. At home, she deleted every dating app on her phone with vicious taps of her thumb. Lux Connect, Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, all of them gone, as if erasing the apps could erase what had happened. But the damage was permanent, coded into reality like a stain that wouldn't wash out. She kept checking her regular messages obsessively, half hoping Shadow_King97 would text her from a different number and explain this was all a terrible mistake. Some cosmic glitch. A misunderstanding that could be fixed with an explanation and an apology. Half terrified that Francis would send termination papers. Or worse, photos, evidence, proof of her misconduct distributed to HR, to her professional network, to everyone who'd ever wondered if Linda Kayla was as professional as she pretended to be. Instead, she got silence. Deafening, suffocating silence that stretched through the evening like a prison sentence. No calls, no texts, no emails, nothing from Francis, nothing from Shadow_King97. Nothing from anyone. By 7 p.m., Linda had convinced herself she'd imagined everything. Maybe it had been a technical glitch. Maybe her wine and exhaustion-addled brain had hallucinated Francis's face on that profile. Maybe she was having some kind of breakdown that required immediate psychiatric intervention. She checked Lux Connect one more time, even though she'd deleted it an hour ago. Redownloaded the app with shaking hands. Logged back in, searched for Shadow_King97's profile. Nothing. Completely gone. Not just deleted, scrubbed from existence as if the account had never been created. Linda sat on her couch, staring at her Korean drama playing unwatched on the TV, and felt her carefully constructed world crumble to ash. The compartmentalization that had protected her for years, work Linda separate from real Linda separate from dating Linda, had collapsed into a single, horrible truth. She was completely exposed, completely vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of a man who showed none. She ordered takeout she couldn't eat. Poured wine she couldn't drink. Tried to focus on anything that wasn't the catastrophic mistake she'd made in that bathroom stall. By 8:30 p.m., Linda had almost convinced herself that maybe Francis would let it go. Maybe he'd enjoyed the psychological torture enough that he'd consider them even. Maybe tomorrow she'd show up at work and he'd continue pretending she didn't exist, and they'd both silently agree never to speak of this again. By 8:45 p.m., she'd started to relax. Started to breathe. Started to believe she might actually survive this. At 9 p.m., Exactly when Shadow_King97 used to transform from cold to passionate, her doorbell rang. Linda froze on her couch, her wine glass suspended halfway to her lips. She wasn't expecting anyone, hadn't ordered anything else, had no friends who'd show up unannounced. Through the peephole, she saw a figure in an expensive suit that made every drop of blood in her body turn to ice water. Francis Tom stood on her doorstep. And this time, there would be no pretending. No gaslighting. No deniability. This time, he'd come to collect. Okay, this is where everything changes. If you're not already subscribed, hit that button now because the next few chapters are going to blow your mind. Comment below what you think Francis is about to say. Let's get into it. The knock at 9 p.m. wasn't a coincidence. Linda understood that the moment she saw Francis Tom through her peephole, standing on her doorstep like a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Shadow_King97 had always transformed at 9 p.m. Cold and distant during the day, attentive and passionate after dark. The timing was deliberate, a final reminder that every pattern, every detail, every moment of their connection had been orchestrated by the man now waiting outside her door. Linda's hands trembled as she approached the door, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She left the chain attached, a pathetic gesture of control that they both knew meant nothing, and cracked the door open just enough to see his face. Francis smiled. It wasn't the cold, expressionless mask he wore at work. This smile was something else entirely, predatory, knowing, dangerous. The smile of a man who'd been playing a game he'd already won before his opponent even knew they were playing. Linda. Her name in his mouth sounded different than it did at work. Intimate. Possessive. I think we both know I'm capable of finding out anything I want to know. May I come in? We have things to discuss. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. A reminder that this wasn't a request. It was a courtesy he didn't have to extend. How did you? Linda's voice came out smaller than she intended. How did you get my address? Francis's smile widened slightly. Linda, I know how you take your coffee. I know you're afraid of thunderstorms. I know what you look like in lace underwear at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. Did you really think I didn't know where you live? The words hit like a slap. He was done pretending, done with the gaslighting and deniability. This was Francis Tom without the corporate mask, and somehow that was more terrifying than his cold office persona. Linda's hands fumbled with the chain because what choice did she have? He could break down the door if he wanted. Could make her life hell tomorrow at work if she refused him tonight. Could do God knows what with his rumored connections if she tried to fight. The chain slid free with a click that sounded like surrender. Francis entered her space, and immediately her small apartment felt smaller. His presence was overwhelming, too tall, too commanding, too aware of every detail around him. He looked around with genuine interest, taking in her framed Korean drama posters, her overflowing bookshelves, her collection of cookbooks from different countries. His eyes landed on the TV where Crash Landing on You was paused mid-episode. Crash Landing on You, he said with what sounded like genuine amusement. Good taste. The one where the heiress accidentally paraglides into North Korea and falls for the army officer. I can see why you'd like it. The forbidden nature of their relationship, the power imbalance, the way they can't resist each other despite every reason they should stay apart. Linda's stomach dropped. He wasn't just making small talk. He was drawing parallels, showing her that he understood her better than she understood herself. You recommended it, Linda whispered, her back pressed against the wall as Francis moved deeper into her apartment. 3 weeks ago, Shadow_King97 sent me a list of shows and that was number 1. I did. Francis settled onto her couch as if he owned it, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Just like I recommended those films you'd never heard of. Just like I sent you that playlist for thunderstorms. Just like I told you that you were brilliant, beautiful, and braver than you realized. He leaned forward, his expression intense. All of that was real, Linda. The conversations, the connection, the way I knew exactly what you needed to hear because I'd been watching you for months, learning you, understanding you better than those surface-level idiots you'd been entertaining on those apps. Linda's legs felt weak. She couldn't process what he was saying. That Shadow_King97 hadn't been a performance, that the vulnerability and attention had been genuine even while being weaponized against her. The only thing I lied about, Francis continued softly, was who I was. Everything else? That was me. The real me. The version that exists after 9 p.m. when I stop pretending to be the emotionless boss everyone fears. He stood up, moving toward her with deliberate slowness. Which makes what happens next very simple, Linda. We both know what you promised me. What you said you'd do if we ever met. And now we're finally in the same room without pretense or distance or screens between us. Francis stopped inches from her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, subtle, the same scent she'd noticed at work without ever connecting it to the man who'd been consuming her nights. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to decide right now whether Shadow_King97 was just fantasy, or if you meant every word you said to him. Chapter 10. Francis's smile at her doorstep had been predatory, but the one he wore now, settling onto her couch as if he owned it, as if he owned her, was something far more dangerous, patient. I want what you've been promising me for weeks, Linda. His dark eyes never left her face, tracking every micro-expression, every tremor of fear or confusion or something she didn't want to name. All those late-night messages. All those suggestions about what you'd do if we ever met. Did you think those were just words? Just fantasy? Linda's back pressed against the wall, her mind scrambling for arguments, for defenses, for anything that might shift the power dynamic back toward something resembling balance. I didn't know it was you. Does that matter? Francis tilted his head with disturbing calm, the gesture almost curious, as if he genuinely wanted to understand her logic. You wanted Shadow_King97. You sent him explicit photos. You told him your darkest desires. That was me, Linda. Every conversation, every promise. And now it's time to deliver. Linda's legs gave out. She sank into the chair across from him, her body making decisions her brain couldn't process. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. Men like Francis Tom didn't show up at employees' apartments demanding, "Let me make this very simple for you." Francis's voice shifted, taking on the businesslike precision he used in board meetings when dismantling competitors. You violated company policy by engaging in inappropriate conduct during work hours. You sent explicit material using company Wi-Fi. I have evidence, screenshots, timestamps, metadata proving every message came from company property during business hours. I have grounds to terminate you immediately and pursue legal action for misuse of company resources. He paused, letting the words sink in like poison. But I'm giving you an alternative. Linda's mouth went dry. Which is, you fulfill the promises you made to Shadow_King97. Voluntarily, enthusiastically, for as long as I desire. Francis leaned forward, his eyes intense. In exchange, your job remains secure, your reputation untarnished. No one at Apex Holdings will ever know what happened today. No HR complaints. No termination. No scandal. That's not an alternative, Linda whispered. That's blackmail. It's a business arrangement. Francis's correction was smooth, practiced, the words of a man who'd negotiated far worse deals than this. You provide what you already promised. I provide job security and discretion. Everyone gets what they want. I don't want this, don't you? He studied her with unnerving focus. You wanted Shadow_King97. You fell for him, opened up to him in ways you haven't with anyone in years. That was me, Linda. The vulnerability, the attention, the connection, all real. The only variable that's changed is that now you know my face. Linda's hands clenched in her lap. You manipulated me, lied to me. I omitted one detail, Francis corrected. Everything else was truth. And you can try to convince yourself that the connection wasn't real, but we both know better. We both know what you felt when you read those messages at midnight. What you feel right now, underneath the fear and anger. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. So here are your options, Linda. Tomorrow morning, you either show up at my office ready to discuss the terms of our new arrangement, or you submit your resignation. And if you choose resignation. His voice went cold, confirming every rumor she'd ever heard about his connections. I ensure that every company in this city knows exactly why you were let go. Sexual harassment, inappropriate workplace conduct, sending explicit materials to your supervisor. You'll be unhireable. Your name will be poison in every professional circle that matters. Francis moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't read. And given certain connections I have, your problems won't end with just employment difficulties. I'd hate for your mother to receive copies of those photos. Or for your college alumni network to see exactly what kind of professional you've become. Or for those dating app conversations to find their way to every social media platform you're on. The threat hung in the air like smoke. I'll give you tonight to think about it, Francis said, his hand on her doorknob. But Linda, don't try to run. Don't try to fight this. We both know how this ends. The only question is whether you accept it gracefully or make things unnecessarily difficult for both of us. He opened the door, then delivered his final blow. For what it's worth, I never lied to you. Everything Shadow_King 97 told you was true. I just omitted one detail. And you never asked the right questions. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Linda sat in stunned silence, her mind racing through impossible scenarios that all ended the same way. Trapped, cornered, caught in a web she'd helped weave with every vulnerable message she'd sent. Outside, she heard Francis's car start. Watched through her window as his headlights disappeared down the street. She had 12 hours to decide whether to submit or resist. But something Francis had said kept echoing in her mind. You never asked the right questions. What questions should she have asked? And more terrifying, what answers had she missed? The questions Francis left behind were more suffocating than his presence had been. You never asked the right questions. Linda sat frozen in her chair long after his car disappeared, her mind racing through impossible scenarios that all ended with her destroyed. She could go to HR, but Francis probably controlled our. Could go to the police, but report what? A dating app conversation that no longer existed? Could run, but if Francis really had Mafia connections, geography wouldn't save her. She'd seen how he made problems disappear with a phone call. She was trapped in a web she'd helped weave with every vulnerable message, every explicit photo, every boundary she'd crossed thinking she was safe behind a screen. As the shock began to wear off, other emotions surfaced like drowning victims gasping for air. Rage at being manipulated so thoroughly. Humiliation at falling for a performance designed specifically to exploit her weaknesses. Fear of what tomorrow would bring regardless of which choice she made. But underneath all of it, something more complicated she didn't want to name. Because part of her, the part that had fallen for Shadow_King 97's vulnerability and intelligence, kept replaying his final words. I never lied to you. Everything Shadow_King 97 told you was true. Had it been real? The conversations about childhood trauma? The admission that he focused on things obsessively until he destroyed them? The way he knew exactly what she needed to hear because he'd been watching her, learning her, understanding her better than she understood herself. The man who'd sent her a playlist for thunderstorms and remembered her coffee order, did that person exist inside Francis Tom? Or was it all just another layer of manipulation? And if it was real, if any part of Shadow_King 97's vulnerability had been genuine, was she attracted to her own captor? The thought made her sick. But she couldn't stop wondering. Linda pulled out her phone, staring at the blank screen where Shadow_King 97's messages used to be. Francis had given her 12 hours to decide between submission and destruction. But maybe there was a third option he hadn't considered. Maybe the man who'd been so careful to learn everything about her had revealed more than he intended. Maybe in all those midnight conversations, Shadow_King 97 had shown her exactly where Francis Tom was vulnerable. And maybe, just maybe, Linda Kayla was done being prey. The question was, did she have the courage to become the predator? Tomorrow morning would reveal which version of herself she'd choose to be. We're at the final chapter and things are about to get real. Make sure you're subscribed because you need to know what happens next. Drop a comment, Team Francis or Team Linda. Let's finish this story. Linda didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Francis's smile at her doorstep, heard his voice saying, I never lied to you, felt the weight of impossible choices crushing her chest. She spent the night analyzing every conversation with Shadow_King 97 through this new, horrifying lens. The pattern made perfect sense now. Francis was cold during work hours because he was maintaining professional distance, watching her across the office while pretending she didn't exist. Then at 9 p.m., he'd let his guard down, be himself, pursue her without the constraints of his position. But was any of it genuine? Or was it all calculated seduction designed to trap her exactly where she was now, powerless, compromised, with no way out that didn't destroy her? Did he target her specifically? Search for her on that app and create shadow_king97 just for her? Or was she simply convenient, another employee to manipulate for whatever sick game powerful men played? And the most terrifying question, the one that kept her awake as dawn crept through her curtains: what happens if she says yes? Not because she has a choice, but because part of her wants to know if shadow_king97 was real. If the vulnerability he showed her, his childhood trauma, his fear of being alone, his admission that he focuses on things obsessively until he destroys them, if any of that was true. At 6:47 a.m., Linda stood in front of her closet, trying to decide who she'd be today. The terrified employee submitting to her boss's blackmail? The woman seeking answers about the man behind the screen? Or someone else entirely, someone who finds her own power in this impossible situation? She pulled out a black dress. Professional. Fitted. The kind that could mean business or seduction depending on context. Linda Kayla thought she was good at compartmentalizing her life, at keeping different versions of herself safely separated. She was about to discover that some walls, once broken, can never be rebuilt. At 7:45 a.m., she walked into Apex Holdings with her head high and her heart hammering. At 8 a.m. sharp, she knocked on Francis Tom's office door. When he looked up and saw her standing there, his expression revealed nothing. But his eyes, those dark, knowing eyes, held a question that would determine everything that came next. Linda took a breath and made her choice. What happened behind that closed door would either destroy her or transform her. Only time would tell which.